Panel on the program here in the studio, David Gazzard, a former Liberal advisor, and of course Ben Oquist with the Australian Institute. Thanks for your time, gentlemen. We've got Elbow on the listening tour, and Josh Frydenberg was on the telling tour earlier this week, telling banks cut the rate when, we know that the interest rate cut was going to happen. ANZ went first and didn't go all the way. What did you make of that?
Well, you have to admire the ANZ for having a modicum of courage, I'd have to say, in being the first bank after a Royal Commission to be faced with a rate cut and not passing the
courage in the yes minister sense. Perhaps.
Correct. I've been looking to see if there are reasons for them not cutting as far as the other banks have, but if their funding costs have risen, I think they need to get out and talk about it.
It's an interesting one because it's one at the margins for them. It's hardly going to change their financial year. They're just going to get bashed for a few days now, aren't they?
Well, I suppose so, but presumably that means they're not cutting rates for as much for depositors as well. And we've just
that's the relationship here, so I guess we can dive down on that when we know what the rest of the banks are doing there.
Yeah, well, we had an election supposedly fought on a retiree tax, so maybe they're doing it for retirees. I didn't hear Josh Frydenberg demanding that the interest rates stay high for depositors, because for every home owner there's a depositor as well. It swings and roundabouts, so there'll be some retirees who'll be upset about the rate cut.
There always are, and we always hear from them, so it's a valid point. What about where this puts the economy at more broadly? It's never a sign that things are humming along.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. I think, the bank has indicated, and there's a couple of schools of thought about this, because you need to have some powder in reserve in case things really do start slowing. So I think they've obviously had a bit of an eye, because they set 3 to 5 years down the track to what's happening globally. I think, there's been some signs, we've had low wages growth for some time. Inflation is very low. There has been some signs of strength in the job market, but clearly, retail sales today fell. So clearly the economy is sort of bumping along, and so they think they can put a bit of stimulus back in. I think the tax cuts will help, although they're loaded out through the out years. But one thing you wouldn't want to have done is been to have massive tax hikes. The other thing you wouldn't have wanted to do is curb the enthusiasm of business with a whole range of different regulatory moves. You would not have wanted to kill the housing market with negative gearing changes. You wouldn't have wanted to have capital gains tax reforms that made it less advantageous to invest. So,
right. So, but there are signs of Labor's policy. But what about what else the RBA has said about getting the economy going, specifically about structural reform? So you might talk about holistic tax reform, the sort of stuff Scott Morrison played footsie with and then kicked to the curb when he was Treasurer, or dare I say industrial relations. I mean, these are the things the government's not talking about. Should they start to?
I think the government will be looking for a very clear signal from business before it goes there again, after seeing what
on IR, you mean, and company tax cut.
After you've done, you've run into this is the way they think about it. They ran into a hail of gunfire around both workplace reform in 2004 to 2007, and then company tax reform, and at the end received almost no support, right? And I'm saying that generically, there were some in both cases, but they were left high and dry on both those issues, and it'll be a while to go back there. I saw Zed just previous to this saying you'd want to go and get a mandate, and I think that's quite simple.
Makes it a while off, though. I guess this is an opportunity for the left of politics. We know about the various policies they had on, they say closing tax loopholes. That is the Labor Party, and Greens went along with it as well, and fairness, but growing the economy as well. If you take something out of the economy but then offer something back, then it might be a bit more palatable.
Yeah, well, let's go through this. Record low wage growth, lowest since the Second World War. Employment growth, according to our Centre of Future Work, some of the lowest outside a recession we've ever had. Business investment, capital expenditure, down 1.7% in the March quarter. GDP growth only at 0.2% in December, a low figure expected tomorrow. 13 interest rate cuts in a row. Inflation low. I mean, this is disastrous economic management, and this from a government that went to the election on the basis of a good economic track record. And The RBA is saying, with this interest rate cut, with inflation this low, exactly the opposite. Now, so what to do? No, they're the facts. So what to do about it? Now, trimming tax concessions for the wealthier and spending it where it's more likely to hit the hands of low-income earners makes economic sense, as you were alluding to. That's the recipe for
but
getting growth.
There's also that the
going.
RBA wants structural reform to the economy.
Yeah.
Which Labor was closing loopholes, but not the sort of
That's a
structural
reform.
Well, hang on, but because the RBA mentioned specifically when it's talking about that as well, that supports firms expanding, investing and employing people.
Yeah,
You don't do that by hitting the high end. There's no doubt about that.
well, Labor had, of course, a much more targeted investment guarantee that was about encouraging investment. And as I just said, we've had a massive downturn in business investment under this government. So we do need some other policies to get it going, and that was one of them. But let's look at a big picture. The current recipes for getting wages going are not working, and the government doesn't have any plan to get wages going. And again, the forecasts have been proven wrong. And this verdict from the RBA says something different. And I think
the Labor plan for wages was basically just get people to get paid more rather than business earning more and handing more out.
It was to lift wages. You're right. The Labor's plan to lift wages was to lift wages, and the current system hadn't been working. So yes, something on penalty rates. Yeah, there's something structurally wrong with the economy when profits have been going up and profits are at record highs and continuing to do well, but wages aren't.
A lot of factors in there, including mining, for example. Where
absolutely.
The increases in those profits just don't. You're not going to double.
But there's something structurally wrong, and something structurally needs to change. But here's something I think is really important that Paul Kelly talked about before. We've got a government moving towards surpluses and bigger surpluses, contractionary fiscal policy, and an RBA saying we need to loosen monetary policy, and they're in conflict, and it's not a time to be racking up bigger and bigger.
What of that, David?
Well, I first of all would say the one thing you really want to do is you want to eliminate your budget deficit, so you're not paying a debt servicing ratio, which at the moment is roughly half of the health budget. So that's just in interest rate payments out overseas.
This is a question now whether those surpluses should be sacred, I suppose.
Now,
if things really do get bad.
Fiscal policy and monetary policy have to work hand in glove. You've got to have expenditure on infrastructure, which they do. You want to have a progressive-looking tax system, which has been opposed tooth and nail every step of the way by Labor and the Greens in terms of actually cutting the tax of business who are going to do the employment.
So go back to company tax cuts above 50 million turnover?
If you had your way, you would, right? But can anyone see a way through the Senate?
Oh.
There were ads running through the campaign where they were attacking the government for promising to have cut taxes.
Right, but it'll be. I see. It's going to be a lot harder now, but there's more of a path than there was before.
I think the government would want to see business coming out very, very strongly.
Business makes the case, and then the government.
Correct.
All right.
I mean, they've got to work within the parameters they've got, right? Unless you can get the Greens to suddenly say we're going to pass it in the Senate.
It makes no economic or political sense to spend a fortune on company tax cuts that won't necessarily deliver that economic.
Except for particularly the global competitive element, where we do have higher taxes, albeit people still tend to invest in Australia anyway. I do want to ask you quickly about the story on the raid on the home of Annika Smethurst. This is to do with a story revealed last year that the ASD might be spying on Australians for the first time. What did you make of this?
It all looks pretty creepy, doesn't it? To come just after the election, a real clampdown on journalistic freedom. A story that was about a policy the government was thinking about introducing in the public interest to get it out there, and a raid just after the election looks pretty weird to me. I was struck by Centre Alliance's Rex Patrick's intervention today, a crucial vote that the government needs in the upcoming Senate, who said this is part of a trifecta of government clampdown on secrecy. Witness K, the treatment of the ATO whistleblower, treatment of freedom of information requests, and now this attack on journalism.
David, what did you make of it?
Look, I'm a former journalist, so you want to give up that liberty, with a lot of reason, right? I come from that perspective, and the public's right to know. I accept all that. I think what this demonstrates is that we have moved so far down the track around security that you were even having to contemplate these measures, right? So we're we're moving into a stage where, say something did happen and the government hadn't used its powers and there was a major terrorist attack, for instance, I don't think anyone would then be arguing about, you know, the rights of journalists. Right?
But how does that apply in this case
moment.
when we're talking about a story that was simply going to reveal that Australians were going to be spied on?
Yeah,
revealing.
I think this is the end of where we're going to, right?
So that means we've gone too far.
This is a discussion. This is a discussion at a departmental level about potentially going in so they can stop an attack if they found that material, right? That's where they're going. So I don't think anyone really feels comfortable in this space.
But let's get back to the fact that it's the mere reporting of it that gets raided.
Yeah, and I think it's the disclosure of the sensitive information, right?
But it wasn't information about a terrorist attack, it was information about a government policy.
Yeah, no,
that's
exactly right. But what is the intent of the policy, right? And that is to
but
make
that's
sure
like one step. That's saying, well,
absolutely. But why would you take that step if you weren't looking to take the second step? That's what they're trying to prevent, right? They're not going out deliberately just to find information from journalists. They're using that information potentially to prevent attacks. That's where.
Well, to prevent a whistleblower is what they're trying to do, getting more information out of the department.
It was not.
Surely that's the intent. It's nothing to do with
the release. But it gives. I think it gives the agencies the power to go out and block any threat.
But we're not suggesting
should it be
someone
present,
in the department was talking about a specific threat and leaking it. It's merely the laws that were proposed.
Yeah.
Whatever you think of the merits of the laws about allowing agencies to spy on people without a warrant, I think we've all got to agree that we need an open debate about whether to have those laws.
I agree with that. And you know, I'm not saying it out of any sense of joy, right? As a former journalist, I totally understand those arguments. I'm just saying we've moved down the track to the point where if you have to have the agencies having these discussions, you're into a zone where you're potentially looking at the compromise of life and liberty.
I think the government needs to come out and argue the case about what's going on here. It looks too creepy and it's too serious, and we've heard nothing from them.
Ben Oquist, David Gazzard, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break. Back with the last word.